So my name is Lauren Jensen. I'm the Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Analytics at Calvin College, which is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I've been at Calvin for almost a year and a half, and prior to that I worked at Thompson University with this lovely lady. And
yeah, my name is Melissa Sherman. I'm from TRU. I'll keep referencing to TRU because it's a lot shorter. And that is located in BC, Canada. Is there any Canadians in the room? Am I the only one? That's okay.
I'm Canadian.
She's Canadian. That's okay. I like being Canadian. So yeah, I'm a learning analyst. I won't go into the details of what that job is. You can probably ask Lauren afterwards. She wrote the job. But it's, in Lauren's words, it's the coolest job in the world. So I work specifically with Tableau and finding answers. Calvin College is more focused in the liberal arts and professional programs. It is more of a traditional college structure. And our FTEs, you can see Calvin's FTEs are a lot closer to their student counts. And the reason for OL, or for TRU, the difference is a lot of our students, especially in the open learning distance side, are what we call course takers. So they're students that come in, they take a course, but they're at a different institution, but they still count towards our FTEs. So that's why you're seeing the big difference there. And the tuition is substantially different.
Just a little bit different, yeah.
Just a little.
And even the campus, both campuses are incredibly beautiful in beautiful parts of the world, but how we deal with space is also quite different for the two institutions. So the reason that we kind of highlight the differences is just to say, you know, we can look at this in two very different places. Open learning has a lot of continuous entry, so much more of a business model. Open access, so we had to measure a lot of things that were very complex, and Tableau really supported that. So Melissa was explaining to me last night, when you actually go in and look at server utilization at TRU, like the hits to views and the usage in open learning is like this big, right? Imagine a bar chart, whatever the number is. And campus is about this big, right? So it really ballooned out in open learning, and we continued over the years to add more licenses, develop more content, develop more things in Tableau, develop our capacity of our analysts, and then continue to go to conferences. And Melissa, you can speak a bit about recent times, the last 2 years.
So as Lauren said, she moved over to open learning to start a new department. And that department really pushed analytics, and open learning really grabbed a hold of that concept that we need data-driven decision making, we need analytics. And we were so good at it that the campus side said, well, we want it too. So we merged the two departments. So the OL department was called Planning and Effectiveness, and we merged it with the IR office to make a brand new office called Integrated Planning and Effectiveness. And the goal of that department now is to, one, include the institutional research, which is critical, but also to incorporate that planning side into it, and to make more of our planning integrated, so integrating our space planning and our student enrollment planning and all of the other processes that come into play, and integrating them into one university.
And then Calvin had a shortly shorter timeline. This is probably more familiar to a lot of you guys in the room. So in 2013, Calvin purchased a bunch of desktop licenses and 35 named users, and quite quickly demonstrated the value of this. It was the vision of our CIO, who's in the back of the room, and I'm very grateful for his vision. And so within a year, we upgraded to a core-based, the unlimited server, which is just fabulous to have. But it is a big investment, and we'll talk more about that later. And then in the summer of 2015, Calvin made another investment in analytics, which was the hire of my position. And we've continued to expand desktop users. So even when we look at conference participation, back in 2014, Calvin sent several executives to the conference to sort of capture a vision for it. The next year, sort of, we went down a level and got a lot of the directors to start thinking about, okay, what could this look like in our department? And this year, we actually have 10 of our disparate users and across the different functions that are our data experts, and they're here really learning more about how they can actually implement and use this in their areas. So I'm very excited for that. But those are two very different approaches to implementing and developing Tableau over time.
So we would just want to do a brief history of analytics in higher ed. So just to get an idea of the room, how many of you are are doing reporting in enrollment management, financial, budgeting? Yes. So this is primarily where higher ed is at. A lot of institutions aren't really getting to that next step of using that data for strategic planning, for decision making. And there's barriers to this, there's challenges. Cost in higher ed is a big one. I think everyone can agree with that. Especially for me at a public institution where every dollar is counted. So the cost of implementing a structure like Tableau has its challenges. Getting clean data. How many people have clean data? Okay, so that's a good sign, I'm not alone. So having that clean data, having access to the right data, having proper ownership of the data is a challenge. Having a culture that wants to use data is a big challenge, especially I think in higher ed. You know, you're working with faculty that they know what they're talking about. And you don't necessarily know what you're talking about. So trying to push that data culture is another challenge. And having people that have those expertise, having people that are trained in softwares like Tableau that can help people get the answers is another challenge.
And we're data people, so we like charts.
Yes.
This is another, so both of these come from various market research that we've done, but Educause does a lot of work in this realm. So if you guys aren't familiar, go check out Educause. But they did a study in 2015 and found that analytics is a major institutional priority only at 28% of higher ed institutions, right? Which means that if my math's right, 72% it's either at a departmental or a divisional level or not an interest or not a priority. So our point today is really to how do we help move that dial a little bit better and help equip you guys to help move that at your institutions. But it is a growing interest. So from 2014 to 2015, 84% say it's more important than 2 years ago, right? So it's catching on. People are realizing that there's a need for it, but not surprisingly, there's limited resources and funding, and we don't necessarily know well, how do we do this, right? So less than 20% of institutions say they have adequate funding or adequate analysts, right? And many people in the room are probably those analysts that feel like, I need more support, or there needs to be more of us, or how do we do this better so that, you know, in a resource scarce environment, we can still demonstrate the value of this. And this is another way of looking at it, also put out by Educause. And this right here on the y-axis shows the functions that are in place in higher ed related to analytics, right? So things that there's a lot of, right? Data analysis, statistical analysis. But on the x-axis, we see the functions, reporting functions that are needed, right? So here we see that anything below this yellow line is where there's more need than there is resources or function in place, right? That's a lot. But we do see that there are some strengths in higher ed, like statistical analysis. I think that there's a good history of statistical analysis in higher education. But if you, so below this red line are kind of the areas where there's like that 30% gap, where there's really need but very little in place. And I think this will speak to this audience because, I mean, I've circled those, right? Data visualization. Tableau. I don't think I need to maybe convince you guys of that, but analytics tool training too, right? So once you implement something like Tableau, how do you actually execute on that and build it into your culture, right? So how do you train people how to use it and how to interpret it and things like that, as well as predictive modeling, right? So we do really well in statistical analysis and not very well in predictive. Right? Does this sound familiar to you guys, this case? Like, is anybody out there doing a lot of predictive in their institutions? Great. We've got a couple trying. Great.
Yes.
Yay. We're trying, yes. So the landscape is pretty common out there, and I would argue that it's behind a lot of other industries, which is why I think we need to advocate for this in higher education. So why? And again, I may be preaching to the choir here, but maybe this can help you guys think about it in bringing it back to your places as well. So the main reason for, I think, that we need to support analytics is for decision support, right? How do we move from data? We have lots of data. Maybe we don't have the right data, but we have data. How do you move that from data to information, from information to knowledge, and knowledge to wisdom? So when I interviewed with the president at Kelvin, he said, well, we have tons of data, and we have some information and even less knowledge, and well, we'll leave it at that, right? So how do we work better and become smarter in what we're doing? So this is pretty common language when we talk about data, right? This progression. There's another way that I prefer to think about it, and this is really about moving from assumption, right? That gut check, those things that we think we know, and I think we all find that in our worlds, that a lot of people say, well, this is just the way it is, or the way we do it, or we know this because anecdotally we know this. So how do we move from assumption to curiosity, where we can ask questions, right? Where we can get people to break down the assumptions that they have and say, well, what exactly is happening? Am I sure that the narrative that I've heard is true? So how do you move from assumption to curiosity, and then from curiosity to discovery? So how do we actually discover new things when we ask new questions, right? And then how do we move from discovery to innovation? And innovation being the place where we change the way we do things, where we change our behaviors, and where we really lean into our future, right?
So how many people have heard of Stephen Few? A couple people. If you haven't heard of him, I would highly recommend looking him up. He has some amazing examples of data visualization, and he's always posting on his blog. So this is something he talked about on one of his blog posts back in August. And the thing that he's really trying to drive here is that there needs to be a need for awareness when you're communicating to your end user. And I think we all have kind of our own lingo, like IT has its own lingo, and IR has its own lingo, and Tableau has its own lingo. So it's very easy for me to say, well, you just move this pill and into this dimension, you convert the dimension, and da-da-da-da, and people are like, yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about. So it's something that we have to be more conscious of, I think, especially in higher ed, that, your provost or your president isn't going to understand the nitty-gritty details, and that's where storytelling, and Tableau is great for that, storytelling comes into place. And it's important to have the both. Skilled statisticians are incredibly valuable, but only if they can explain their findings in understandable terms. And putting it into those understandable terms is what's going to help generate that data-driven decision making. Oh, yes, and this is why we have Tableau, because it makes it easy for us to explain these things to the people. And it helps people, say you're from an IT background and it's very technical and it makes sense in your head. You can look at a whole string of numbers and you understand what's going on. But tools like Tableau help you bring it into a different perspective and an easier perspective that people can understand. And people like myself who don't have that strong IT background, it helps me work with the data to make it sense for everyone else.
I think this underlined part too is sort of the common ground that we can find when we have people that are maybe less supportive of using data in higher ed. It's that how do you find that common ground, that desire to get better? How can we help you do your work better and be more effective and efficient? And here's just another quote that I like. It's just, you can explain a symphony with all of the wave variations, the variations of wave pressure, or you can listen to it, you can experience, you can hear the story of it. So when we think about data, how do we make sure that we're not just listing out a bunch of numbers, but telling the story, bringing the emotion into it, bringing the narrative into our data analysis and analytics. So, time to grow up. This is just our framework for thinking about how higher ed can grow up. So I talked a lot about judgment to curiosity, curiosity to discovery, discovery to innovation, and it's sort of, in that curiosity stage, how do we make sure we're asking the right questions and answering the right questions? So this is an analytics maturity model that's taken from the International Institute of Analytics. If you aren't familiar with them, they've got some great resources. But it talks about how do we go from descriptive and reporting, where we answer questions like, well, what happened, right? Where we look in the rearview mirror and say, what just happened to us? And moving up to say, okay, well, what is exactly the problem and what actions are needed? And we saw earlier that higher ed actually does this part quite well, right? But maybe we skip some other areas that are important, right, around alerts and stuff. So what happens if we try this? If this, then what scenarios do we do with our data? Are we predictive? Are we saying what will happen next? Or what's the best that can happen, right? So this sort of answers that, where are we headed? I've used this a lot at Kelvin to show people, like, a lot of times people will say, well, we do a lot of data. Yes, we do a lot of data. We do a lot of reporting, and most of it lives here, right? And we don't want to diminish that or ignore that, but we also want to move up to this to better face our future, right? So this answers the question of, where are we headed? And the next question is, well, how do we get there, right? So this is another framework to consider, and this is an analytics maturity index that comes from EDUCAUSE as well. Has anybody seen this before? Wow. 2, and one's from my school.
You're gonna see it now.
So this is just a really great framework to start thinking about the how. And I encourage you guys to go take a look at it. You can actually go on and take the online assessment of your institution. And they break it down into 6 areas that will help you mature analytics, right? And we're going to walk through each one and define it and talk about some of the challenges that we face in higher ed with regards to some of the workarounds, some of the side steps we've had to do, and hopefully you guys that will resonate with you guys and help you guys think about it. But the idea is that each one of these, as you mature in each area, you sort of go from this ring of just getting started with analytics to visioning it, to launching it, to implementing it, and ultimately to transforming your institution. And this to me is key, because when I talk to a lot of Tableau users, and as I've interacted with them over the years, I hear a lot of Tableau, like from analysts, Tableau changed my life. And I'd say, great, how is it changing your institution? How do you get it from, it makes my job easier, I don't have to spend as much time, manipulating the data in all of these ways, to actually changing the culture of your organization. So these are the steps that I think to consider to help you do that. So we're gonna walk through each one, starting with, the other piece. So I also like to think of these as gears, that they have to work together. So if you have 1 or 2 or 3 of these that are really good, but you really lack in the other ones, moving up that analytics maturity from predictive or up to predictive and prescriptive analytics isn't probably going to happen, right? So you may have all of the, if you have all the clean data in the world, but nobody wants to use it, you're not going to get very far. Or you have all the executive sponsorship for it, but you don't have any investment in the infrastructure or the resources to do it, you're not going to get very far, right? So this is sort of a way to think about how can we move all of these at the same pace or catch up the areas that are behind so that we can actually move as a whole organization forward.
So the first one we're going to talk about is decision-making culture. So leadership buy-in is very important. And cultural acceptance, I put those 2 at the same level of importance because, 1, you need your leaders on board. And you need the people that are going to use the reports to actually use the reports. And a lot of it, my experience at TRU was, as Lauren said, we had a very bottom-up approach. So we bought Tableau and we really tried to push it out. And because we were in a different office than the IR office, who is the official reporting body for our university, we got a lot of, well, your numbers are different. And we don't know if we trust you because you're not the IR office. And that's fair, but it took us a long time to get that trust established. And a lot of that came with us taking that time to understand our data. And a lot of it was like online distance education student data is a completely different ballpark than on-campus traditional. Those students behave differently, their data is different. And that's a lot of the reason why people were saying your numbers are different. But it was us taking that time to sit down with the people and say, this is why the numbers are different. And getting that buy-in, another way we got that buy-in is that we had end users involved for the development of our reports from beginning to end. And that's something that I'm continually doing, is asking them, okay, what is the question you actually want answered? Because people will say, well, I need this enrollment report to do this, this, and this. And I can say, okay, but what are you trying to achieve with that? Like, how do you actually want to use the report? And that's one piece of getting that cultural buy-in, is getting people involved in the report design so that they actually use it in the long run.
How many people would say that they have really strong decision-making culture and leadership support in their organizations? 'Cause my guess, and okay, the room shows it, that this is our biggest challenge, and this is hugely important. So a lot of what Melissa was just explaining is that you got to find the easy wins, or the places where you can just sort of step in. You know, there's a change in government regulation on reporting, or and you can say, oh, hey, look what we've got, and show people, and find those places where you can demonstrate the value and convince people of it. At Kelvin, I think we are quite unique compared to most places where we have great executive leadership and buy-in into this, and therefore big investment. The president is fully on board, the cabinet and the VPs are very excited about this, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, we want it, how do we actually launch it and make sure it works well? So one of the things that we did was that when I came, we sort of focused my first year in 3 key areas to sort of help bring this about at Kelvin. And those 3 were KPIs, so key performance indicators for the institution. So it was a lot about getting the board to hold the college accountable and the accountability at sort of those top levels, saying that this is our reality. We want to understand and measure ourselves. Another one was retention, and I suspect many people in this room have addressed retention in recent years. And so for us, again, how do we look at that? And for us, retention was a great way to actually build cultural acceptance of data at the college. We spend a lot of time doing things differently and asking questions differently at the college this way. So one example is that we sort of broke it apart. We had disparate people all over the college that reported on data, and we sort of put them all in a room together, and I'll get into some of the details later if that's of interest. But what we did was, one time we just said, okay, when you talk about moving from curiosity to discovery, how do you get people to actually change their mindset that way? We put all the best practice people that really knew retention in a room with our data team that had been working on this, and we put up on the wall, we projected Tableau and we projected R. So we had a statistician running R and I was running Tableau, and we just invited these people to come in and ask us any question, right? What are the things you think happen? What is the narrative you hear? Let's test it, let's show it. And it really, in one day, I've never seen a more concrete example of ask the questions. What are the things you've always assumed? Let's validate them. Okay, now let's dig further. And that allows us to go from curiosity to discovery. And in that time alone, we discovered a bunch of new things, and then we realized we needed other new data and pulled that in and can continue to discover new things. So when this doesn't exist at your place, I just keep being persistent, resilient to find those places. The other thing is that data for strategic planning is, or any planning initiatives is also important, and I think making sure that data has a voice at the table is pretty important. Policies. So how many IT folks do we have in the room? Good.
Yeah.
I think this has been a positive change in Tableau over the years, getting more of the IT team here from different organizations. So a lot of institutions have good security policies and practices, rights and privileges, roles and permissions. If you're in IT, great. Thank you for your work in this. It is important work. If you're in the analytics side and this isn't to your level of liking, please go find and build those relationships with your IT department. Yes. Security often gets a bad rap as you're just trying to keep me from doing things, but build that conversation and that understanding of why and how can we work around this. One of the things is that I've worked really closely with our IT department and been able to get the people that need access, the access in a way that works for all of us. So the importance of policies and security is really about equipping and getting people what they need to do their jobs. Now this wasn't always the case at TRU either. We had a lot of lockdown and didn't have access to what we needed, which results in shadow IT systems, which I can't, yeah, thumbs down.
Not recommending it.
But, and it's not maybe my proudest moment to admit that, but the reality is we still needed to mature analytics, and when we didn't have the culture or the buy-in for it, we had to demonstrate the way forward, even to our institution, to say we need this to report this is the value of it. But the thing that we did, and Melissa talked a little about it, we built everything that was shadow IT system in a way that would connect back into the real system and the real warehouses, and we built it with a long-term vision of how can this actually integrate in once we demonstrate the value. So that was anyway, so is there anything else from you want to share from TRU?
No, I think that's everything for that one. Data efficacy, and this is important. So we need clean data, and we need relevant data. I think people can agree that in higher ed we have a lot of data that just kind of sits there, and it's important to get the data standardized and relevant and purposeful data, and getting data processes that are repeatable. And as Lauren said, we did create shadow IT systems with the intention of moving them into Oracle one day, which is a system that we use. And this is Lauren's vision, because what was happening before for reporting was every request that would come in, we would build a script, or someone would write a script, and you'd answer that request based on the script. And then another request would come in. Maybe you'd tweak the script a little bit, and then do that again. So it's more of an ad hoc approach, so every time you're rebuilding and rebuilding or adding on. So Lauren's vision was, how about we create one source that can answer, is it like 90% of the questions that we get in? So we have what we're calling an enrollment detail database. So all of my Tableau workbooks connect to this database. Any question that someone asks, I connect straight to that database. The data is the same, the processes are repeatable, and it's not just me, like any of the analysts can go in and connect to the same data and get the same results again and again and again. And it saves you that time with setting it up in the first place so that you can get more into the insights and the analytics that happen afterwards.
Yeah, it helped build the credibility too, because every time we would produce a report, it would be the same result and it would show the same historical numbers, which seems obvious, but isn't always the case. So at TRU, we did a similar thing like with the retention project that I was describing earlier, where we put all the people in the same room, and then we included IT in that, and had some support there where we were able to build a retention database on our warehouse, and we pulled 12 or so different systems into one place, and everybody that was a data user for retention across the college could then hit that system and do their own analysis. And our Dean of Academic Administration, sort of like our Vice Provost, he's a statistician, and he's been working at Kelvin many years, longer than I've been alive, but we don't mention that too often to him. And he's brilliant, and he's great to work with, and I'll never forget when he just sort of said, wow, our numbers match. And when I talk about that dueling data day where we had R and Tableau up on the wall, we literally, every time he'd be like, huh, our numbers are the same. And usually I'd get there faster and it looked prettier. But we always got the same result, and it was a real winnable moment just to see that. And then what that meant is we could quit arguing, not arguing, but quit spending our time trying to say, why is your number different than mine? Why is enrollment's retention report different than the provost's office, which is different than our registrar, like why are these all different? We could quit having those conversations and either dismissing what somebody else had done or questioning what somebody else had done, and we could spend our time actually analyzing and becoming predictive and creating early alert systems and changing the way we coordinate our care for our students. So the other thing that I think is part of this with data is the idea of a data dictionary. And so both TRU and Calvin have
data cookbook.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's heard of data cookbook before. Yeah, so we've implemented it. We're trying to implement it so that it works with Tableau. So we have our 2 data analysts in our office and our manager of enrollment analysis who are defining all the data definitions in collaboration with our registrar's office and our IT department, so that everyone is using the same language and getting the same results.
And one of the neat things about this too is TRU takes a very different approach than Calvin, and they both work given the context and the cultures of those organizations. So at TRU they have 2 or 3 people that are building this out for the entire university. At Calvin we've got a couple of people shepherding it, but really every data user enters their own definitions. We have working group sessions where people can actually come into a lab and define their data. And we've taken an approach of, hey, let's start with, it's overwhelming to start with and say, how do you define absolutely every element of data, every report, every warehouse, everything. And so we say, as we build new, we're defining it. So 2 very different approaches, but 2 great ways to just get started with what works in your context. And if you can't make the investment in something like that, at TRU, what we did prior to purchasing anything many years ago was when we built our shadow IT systems, we had glossaries and definitions that we just documented in Excel. And that way, anytime people had questions, we could reference that or point them to that. So there's always a way to get started on that. So investment and resources, again, this is something that Calvin has done, I think, quite well in and is probably a little bit unique in, but funding both for current needs, for staffing, for data analysts, for the IT support, but also building out the visual. Right? You can do all the stuff, but if you can't tell the story of the data, you'll still fall short. As well as specialized training for dedicated staff. I heard at the West Michigan Tableau users group, somebody was explaining, well, hey, if you implement Tableau, like often we think of you buy it, you install it, you give people access, and we've done it, right? And that just isn't the case. You have to then go to execution. How do you train people? How do you continuously improve and train people on it? How do you have the people that have the skill sets for it? So you can't think of it as just a buy it, install it, and we're there. So how do you continue to invest and make it a priority? TRU?
Yeah, TRU, we don't have enough. I think it's safe to say that. Especially my job is a very new job, and learning analytics is a very new field. But because of the lack of resources we have, I'm still very much in a reporting role rather than going to that next step of analytics. And it's more, now it's turned into something I do kind of off the side of my desk, and especially with the merge that has happened. It's like more reporting is happening, and it's, again, I'm trying to change a culture that has been that's been going on for so long. In OL, in Open Learning, we had a market research analyst who did all of our market research for all of our programs. Campus side didn't have that, and they wanted it. So when they merged me over to the new team, they took the market research analyst over. But now he is responsible for all of the market research for all of the campus. And it's a requirement that we have to conduct market research before we implement a new program. So he's saying no to a lot of people because he just doesn't have time, and there's no plan to expand that role. And another unfortunate thing that happened with the merge that we had, because in the team we had in Open Learning, it was very diverse. So we had business analysts, we had a learning analyst, we had data analysts, we had market research analysts, we had a budget officer. So we have the market research, enrollment, business process, financial planning all working together, and I think that's what made us so unique. So when the merge happened, we lost the budget officer and we lost the business analyst. So that resource was reallocated to other areas, and so we're now missing that one component.
So I think this is the fifth one, the technical infrastructure tools. So
yes, you
Tableau's
need the
a
right
great one.
tools, and Tableau is one of those right tools. We're going to put that out there.
But it goes beyond that too, and it also speaks to that investment in tools and in the infrastructure, right? So capacity to store, the ability to manage your data, the warehouses that you have, the investment in reporting warehouses or in ETLs or ways to get your data from one place to another, as well as analyze it. Both at TRU and at Calvin, we talk a lot about what's operational reporting, where does that live, what's strategic reporting, where does that live, and different levels in the organization. So this, along with every one of these other ones, I think it requires an analytics strategy in your organization to think about these things together and in concert, and how do we move them forward. So this is certainly part of it, and takes support from your IT office and your leadership. It's about seeing it as an investment rather than an expense. And the last one is IR involvement, and you can take out IR and put in whatever else you want for that matter. And IR is institutional research, for those of you that don't know, but it could also be institutional effectiveness. It's sort of that reporting. So IR typically does accountability reporting and maybe other things, but it's the people that do the reporting, and how do you make sure that there's a strong relationship between the IR office and the IT supporting office. And so that could also be institutional effectiveness. So at Calvin, I am the Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Analytics, and I work very closely with our CIO, and so he was part of the visioning of this role, and we have a really unique, I think, relationship where our two departments or divisions are very collaborative. Sort of, we say sister departments or cousins or whatever. We're close cousins. And so we spend a lot of time working together, and we actually are both part of a division that we call People, Strategy, and Technology. And it's where it's just like it sounds. We put people, HR, that perspective, along with strategy, so strategic planning, strategic initiatives, in there is the analytics side of it, and technology. And how do those all work together? And how do we communicate about that? How do we strategize about that? How do we vision that for the institution? And then also having IR leaders involved in the planning process. So in my role, I am part of this. So that doesn't just mean strategic planning, but anytime there's cross-divisional or institutional-wide initiatives, things like sustainability or athletics or whatever it is for your college, how do you think data? And that's a place where your analytics or your IR people can go in and again, move you from assumption to curiosity, right? So ask the questions, frame things, challenge the way we do it, and then move from curiosity to discovery. And those are great venues to do that and to be an advocate for analytics at an institution. Mm-hmm. And at TRU. Yeah,
and we didn't have effective communication, but we're working on it. And one thing we're doing, an approach that they've taken, is the data analyst that moved over with me to the new department now has a shared role between IT and our department. So she has desks in both locations. She's there 50% of the time, and she's with us 50% of the time. And the goal of that is, especially with the data, so that we're in constant communication between IT and the IR. And another thing that we do at TRU is we have what's called a data standards committee. So we have members of our IT department, we have members of our registrar, and we have members of our department and finance as well. And so we're all working together, bringing up issues with the data, clarifying definitions, planning out processes for inputting data and outputting data and where the data is going to live. So it's something that was a little slow to start up, But our leadership has really seen the need for this, so they have really been pushing it.
So again, these 6 work together quite closely. And one of the things I would encourage you guys to do is go check out EDUCAUSE and see what they do, and because you can actually assess and measure your institution in these areas. And so I had the privilege actually that before I started at Kelvin, I sat down with our CIO and our, the VP of People Strategy and Technology, and these were the people that knew this the best at the college at the time. And we actually benchmarked ourselves and said, okay, where are we today? And then 1 year into my job, we did that again and said, okay, look, this is the demonstrated value of it. But we also were able to identify some of the strengths and weaknesses. And so then every year I set my goals around developing out the areas that need to mature the most. So, I mean, if I wanted, I could default to do my favorite of these 6, right? Like I can end up just spending my time in the ones I love the most, but then I'm not being responsible to my organization or to analytics to say that, no, actually we need to actually spend some time working on this, and that's going to help our organization move forward. So it's a great tool to think that way, and it helps then move up this scale. It's not linear, right? Like I don't want to assume that you just go from one to the next to the next. You can bounce around a little bit, but the idea is to keep moving forward. And actually, Tableau is in a beta phase of a very similar tool. Has anybody seen this yet?
It's just down the hall.
Brand new, like this yesterday.
Lauren was the first one to do it yesterday.
Yeah, I got so excited I went and took this assessment yesterday morning. And so you walk down the hall at the education and consulting area, and you can benchmark your own institution. And they're piloting this, they're trying to test it out. And it's very similar. They focus it around people, platform, and process. But all of the 6 things we just talked through are captured within this. It's another framework, and you then can see how you compare to others. So it's benchmarked against your peer, or against everybody else at this point that's taken it. And for this, it was me against the developer of this. So I don't know, and I don't know if that was dummy data. But the point is there's other resources. So it's a good way to start saying, oh, here's one of our areas that we are behind the game on, and we should spend some time developing, helping you communicate those challenges upwards. As far as content, that's the meat of it. So we have a few examples that we can get to and show you guys if you're interested, but we thought we'd start and pause and see if you guys had any questions. Yeah, the data dictionary tool is called Data Cookbook. Cookbook.
Yeah, and how it works with Tableau, I'm told, is if you connect it with Tableau, all of the data that you have loaded into Tableau, the definition will actually populate right there.
You can connect the two, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the question was, with the merge of the TRU departments and the seemingly excess amount of requests, how do you go about prioritizing?
That is a good question. Yeah, because my department didn't really do reporting. Like, we did some, but it wasn't our primary job. So I think the way that we've tried to prioritize it is, because we're still in the baby stages, like we're still in the growing pains of the merge. So we're keeping to current commitments. So the commitment was because there were expectations of my team to support the open learning initiatives. So those commitments still stand. And it's a day by day. So right now I'm still very focused in open learning. I haven't really delved into the on-campus side because we're still figuring it out. I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's a day-to-day prioritization. But it's at the end, am I supporting each of the departments in getting their service? We have service plans, and that help them plan out their years. So am I helping to support them meet their service plans? And then we prioritize that way. But it's a growing process.
I'm from Hope College,
Hope is
College.
Kelvin's biggest rival, just for
so
context.
you all know.
But we're glad you're here.
I don't want to answer too directly. I mean, it's such a big effort to get all of your data up to spec and have you connect with your departments to get what they want out of the data and then provide analytics and reporting. And from your timeline, it looked like you jumped from 35 users to an unlimited license. I mean, I can only dream of that. But having that fast rollout, how did you really? Can you explain kind of how you put all the pieces of the puzzle in place to support that fast rollout without letting it languish too much in a single area?
Right. So the question is, with this accelerated timeline for Calvin to go from 35 named users to the unlimited, how did we make sure that we had the supports in place so that it didn't just sort of sit there or fall apart? And to be honest, I wasn't at Calvin at that time, so Brian, our CIO, is in the back, so I'm going to actually put him on the spot and see if he has an answer to that. and maybe I can...
Give you the mic.
I can speak loudly.
They need it on.
Needs to be recorded.
Yeah, I am Brian Page. I'm the Associate Vice President and CIO at Calvin College, and it's great to hear your presentation today. Yeah, there was an executive commitment to this direction at Calvin, where we wanted to take that assessment tool and figure out how we could actually move the needle on that. So it really started with this top-down data commitment to making data-driven decisions, and that resulted in the investments in the technology and the allocation of human resources toward this. So I would say that that's where it started, and we fast-tracked that. We said we wanted to see progress within 3 years. So so year one was sort of what was described here. Year two was bring on an expert to do this, and we're in our year 3 now, and we've got lots of great results to show for it.
Thank you, Brian.
Just to continue a little bit. So then, are you training a lot of your existing human resources to do a lot of the Tableau and the data prep?
Yeah, so that's been when we looked at our own analytics maturity index, that was one of our not strengths at the time. So that's one of the things that is my focus for this year. So even in the last couple of months, we've done a lot of hands-on Tableau training for our desktop developers and builders, and then we brought a lot of them here. So that is part of it. So it's we continue to do that. Yeah. So sorry. Go ahead.
How large is your IR department?
Our IR department at Calvin is, we don't actually have an IR department. We have an enrollment research person who is closest to our IR department. And so we have one person that does the accountability reporting, like iPads and stuff like that, sits in there. And then our institutional effectiveness and analytics department is me. One person. However, we have data people all over the college that I tap into and work with to accomplish all of this. So it's a lot through communication, influence, networking.
You said very early on that some of your earliest attendees at a Tableau conference were key decision makers and administrators, which in my experience is remarkable, because it sounds like you've had some real visionaries who then brought it back and said, we're going to steer the bus in this direction.
Yes.
Were these business people? Were these administrative people? Were these IT people?
Good question. So the question was the fact that we had at our Calvin's first Tableau conference, we brought sort of that executive leadership with a vision and how unique that is. And I think we included our CIO, Brian was there, the head of HR at the time, the dean for the academic administration, which was the vice provost that did a lot of reporting like that. We also had, was it advancement was there? And some people like that. I don't know exactly who all was there, but it was, does that answer? It was kind of.
How did that happen?
How did that happen?
Who was really motivating the others?
That was, I'm pointing to the back of the room. So a lot of the vision came from IT. So Brian was new to Calvin 4 years ago, and around the same time we had a new president come. So sort of with all of those changes, we were able to set a vision for that. I think Brian was hugely instrumental in that. So I will say, go connect with him afterwards and pick his brain a little bit more, because I don't think we'd be where we did. And when he talked about that 3-year implementation, like, we went after it, we put a timeline to it, we set a goal, and we've run towards that. So.
I'd be interested to show him, because my experience is much more bottom-up.
Yeah, and that was the case at TRU as well.
Yeah,
So.
and yeah, to add to that, like, we've recently, in the last couple of years, we have a new provost, and we have a new VP Finance and Administration, and they're both like, we see what you're doing, and this is good, we need this, and we need data-driven decision-making. And that wasn't the case in our leadership before, but it's now become the case because of the new leadership that's come in.
So, yeah.
You mentioned at TRU you've got your data standards committee. What does Calvin College have with that?
Right, so TRU has a data standards committee, and the question is, what does Kelvin have? And so we have multiple functions, and we're, to be honest, probably still sorting that out. We have a data team that is the users of that, and that's primarily the group that's defining data. We have strong relationships between that and like a cookbook implementation team. So at this point, I'm working closely with IT to sort of just coordinate that and figure out how to actually formalize that, if it should be formalized in our context. So. Yeah, we have a couple different data teams that are working towards that same goal.
That's like basically our next step is we're going to do a data advisory group. That's pretty much
Yeah.
If anybody has any suggestions,
Try and keep it going, because we had it a few years ago and it kind of died out. So I think that's, if you have key people that are willing to continue it on a regular basis, that's probably one of the...
It is probably the least glamorous part of the job.
Yeah.
And I think everybody feels that, so it's the first to get to the bottom of the priority. So putting someone to champion that is important, and freeing people up to have time to do that is important, because it will drop off the radar. One more. How are we on time?
I think we're okay.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
So you talked about how you kind of built like a data source that answered like 90% of the questions.
Yes.
How did you kind of more specifically go about doing that? Was it like build out some of it, got feedback, and like how was that kind of going?
Yeah, so the question is, when we built that data set that answered, 20% of the data that answered 80% or 90% of the questions, how did we go about that process? So that brings me back a long time in my brain.
Yeah.
But what we did was it really started from me saying, oh my goodness, how do we do all this ad hoc reporting and never have the same answers and the same questions? So I worked very closely with our data, what we call data coordinators or data analysts. They're sort of, and said, okay, I did a lot of consulting when I first showed up at TRU and said, what are all of your data needs? What are your questions? What do you guys want answered? So I did a massive go out and find out from people and said, okay, in order to do that, where do we start? What data do we need that we can consistently pull? And then we continued to just expand that and grow that as we could. So some of it was the limitations of what data was available and in what format and how we could pull it. This was back when we had a reporting computer that I would boot up every day and run the pull of all of those things, and it's come a long way since then. But it's that iterative, and that has grown a lot over the time. I think we started with being able to answer 80% of the questions from one source, and it's probably 90 or more at this point. But it's been iterative. It's been a lot of consultation. It's been a lot of people saying, oh, now that we understand this, or now that we see this, what about this? Or giving them a taste and making them ask for more, and then building that more in as time goes by. So there's a question. Did you? In the back.
You talked about the importance of communication between IT and IR, or whatever your IR team, IR proxy is. Could you briefly summarize the kind of distinct roles and responsibilities of your IR and IT departments with regard to Tableau?
Good question. Okay, briefly, when we talk about communication between IR and IT, how does that play out with regards to Tableau is the question. So at Kelvin, IT installs and updates the server. IR manages the who gets permissions, the projects, the sites, the training people, everything else. So when 10.2 comes out, I say, IT, can you update the server so I can tell everyone to update their licenses so that we can publish to the end. Now, so that's how it is at
And it's a similar process in TRU.
What about your data sources?
What do you mean, like the data sources that we use with Tableau?
Yes, who manages those?
Who manages those? Yes. So for us, it's that data team where we have IT representation. So IT actually manages the connecting all of it, and then everybody else validates and tests and tries to break. And yeah, so IT has built, in our case, the reporting database that's in our warehouse. Oh, sure.
After all is said and done, how would you say ultimately this has changed? Has it changed? Has it improved Calvin's retention, graduation rates, or enrollment? Has it made a difference in anything?
Very, very good question. And I will try to be unbiased in my answer. So the question is, has it made a difference? Does it matter? And we know a lot more about ourselves from that, and we've been able to get some early alerts and predictive things in it. And this, because I've been there about a year and a bit, we've implemented with our fall registration a whole new plan to implement all of that. So we know things that drive retention that we didn't know before, and so we can address them, and time will tell if we're effective in that, but we're monitoring it and tracking all of that as well. So culturally, it has made a difference. I've been told that many times over, that our VPs, I mean, all of our reports to the board, they're very much more informed and data-driven and looking for facts with which to make decisions or to support their decisions. Or so I think it's early, but I think it is making a difference, and we see that in the way we approach the work that we do, and the fact that the results have not just sat on the shelf. We are actually changing our behaviors with those. So, Thad. Oh, sorry, Thad is from Calvin in our admin. So he's one of our data users in our
He's our other
advancement area.
fan in the room.
Sure. So it might be a sort of shorthand way to measure institutional built into the assessment how people who are affected by the decisions view assisted learning studies. So people who are affected by the administration's choices on where in this department or anything outcome.
Yeah, so if I hear what you're saying, Thad, it's the decisions that we're using from the data that the VP are using, that the way it affects people in the college, it's helping us understand that, and right. Or,
So I think we're out of time.
oh,
Excuse me, I just have one comment related to that, and not necessarily, I mean, I think it dispels a lot of the, to have this information available, I think it dispels a lot of these assumptions that people have about students and the data, because when you show them facts about it, they have these assumptions about their student that you can dispel that because of using this information.
yeah, assumption to discovering it, right, moving away from that. So it does help us do that better, yes. Well, thank you guys very much.
yes,
We
thank
do
you.
have to say, please take the survey,
Take
the
the survey
evaluation.
for the session. Let us know how we did. We are here for more questions, and if you want to see some examples of what we've done.
Hi.
And just like I said, thank you.
Thank you.
Can't make an hour.
Oh, great, thank you.